There is a debate among designers as to how important it is to align your baselines across columns or even across pages. For example, on this spread, if I scroll over a bit, you'll see that the baselines on this page don't line up with the baselines on this page. I can prove that to you by going out of preview mode into normal mode at the bottom of the tool panel here, and then I'm at a guide on my page. I'll pull a guide out of the ruler here, and if I want to force it to go across the entire spread, I hold down the Command key or the Control key while I drag. See how that goes across the entire spread now? I'll place this right at the baseline of this text over here, and we can see that it does not line up over here. Now, there are a number of ways to fix this, but one of the most common is to force your paragraphs to snap to an underlying baseline grid. Every document has a baseline grid automatically, and you can see it by choosing Show Baseline Grid from the View menu. It's right here in the Grids and Guides submenu. All those little thin blue lines, that's your baseline grid. To snap the text to the baseline grid, I simply use the Type tool. I double-click to get the Type tool there. I place my cursor in a paragraph and then go to the paragraph mode of the control panel. And on the right side of the control panel, there's two buttons. There's Don't Align to Baseline Grid and Align to Baseline Grid. Click on that, and my paragraph snaps to the baseline grid. Now, what's going on with the leading? Every line snaps to every other baseline grid line. That's not right. Well, the problem is that the leading of the paragraph does not match the baseline grid increment. The baseline grid increment looks like it's set to about 1 pica between one line and the next, but the leading is set to 15 points. I know that because if I go to the control panel and I click on the character mode, I can see the leading for this paragraph is 15 points. So how do I get the baseline grid to match my leading? Easy. It's in Preferences. Go to the InDesign menu on the Mac and the Edit menu on Windows, and in Preferences, choose Grids. The baseline grid control is in the Grids panel of the Preferences dialog box. Here it is. We can control the color of it if we didn't like light blue for some reason. We can control where it starts. For example, I could say, let's start the baseline grid at the top margin instead of the top of the page. And then we can control what the increments are. Instead of 1 pica, I'm going to say 15 points. When I click OK, you'll see the change. Now the baseline grid got a little bit larger, and every line of this paragraph snapped right to it. Why don't I apply this to all the text in this story by pressing Command A or Control A on Windows to select all the text, going back to the paragraph mode, and then turning on Align to Baseline Grid. Now all the text across the entire story is aligning to the baseline grid. It's locking right to those baseline grid guides, and it looks much better. Now there's another baseline grid feature in InDesign, and that's frame-based baseline grids. For example, I could select this text frame over here, which has a different text at a totally different leading value, and I could assign a special baseline grid just for that frame. How do I do it? I go to the Object menu, and I choose Text Frame Option. I'll press Command B or Control B on Windows, and then I click on Baseline Options in this dialog box. Here's the custom baseline grid for this particular frame. I'll turn on Use Custom Baseline Grid, and I'll say, let's say relative to the top of the page, set guides that go all the way down every 20 points. I'll change the color of these guides too to something different, just so it stands out a little bit. And when I click OK, you'll see that I now have pink guides inside this frame. It looks like it's already aligning to the baseline grid, but just to be sure, I select that whole paragraph, that whole story, and I turn on Align to Baseline Grid in the control panel. It looks like it moved just a little bit there. And now this is and it's aligning to a different baseline grid. Why would you do this? Well, for example, I'll delete this text frame over here, and I'll duplicate this text frame over to this page. Now the great thing is even though I just casually drag this across, no matter where I put it, I know that this text in this sidebar will always match up with this text on this sidebar. Some people care about those things. You know, personally, I feel that ensuring consistent baselines is important, but not so important that I'm going to lose sleep over it if some of my baselines don't line up. But if you really care about snapping all those lines into place, the baseline grid features definitely help. How do you make sure a heading stays with a paragraph that follows it? Or how do you make sure there's always at least 2 line text at the top and bottom of every page? These issues are the purview of InDesign's Key Options feature. I've opened my Jocko magazine files in the exercise folder, and I'm going to move over here a little bit and look at this subhead at the bottom of the page. How do I make sure that this subhead always stays with the paragraph that follows it? In order to do that, I need to select it or place my cursor inside that paragraph, and then I need to go to Keep Options, which lives in the Control Panel's flyout menu, way over here in the corner of the screen. I'm going to choose Keep Options, or press Command-Option-K, or on Windows Control-Alt-K, and that opens the Keep Options dialog box. I'll turn the preview checkbox so we can see what happens. This dialog box is relatively straightforward. If I want to keep this paragraph with the next paragraph, I can simply say, keep with the next one line. That means that if this first line of the next paragraph ever gets pushed over the next page, the subhead will come with it. Let's see how it works. I'll click OK, and I'll come up here, and I'll add additional space to this paragraph before. So in the paragraph mode of the control panel, I'll go up and change my space after, and I'll just bump that up, and whoa, there we go. I bumped it up to 2 picas, which pushed the text down. And why did it move all the way up here? Because it was following this paragraph, and this paragraph has a different set of keep options. I'll press the keyboard shortcut Command-Option-K or Control-Alt-K on Windows, and we can look at those keep options. This paragraph has Keep Lines Together turned on, and the setup is that we'll never have fewer than 2 lines at the beginning of the paragraph or 2 lines at the end of the paragraph all by themselves. This is how we combat the orphans and widows. Orphans are when you have a single line at the bottom of a column. Widows is when you have a single line at the top of the column. And by setting the at start end of paragraph to at least 2 lines each, we'll never get widows and orphans. So when I added that space after this paragraph down here, it pushed it down so that I could only have 1 line of text at bottom. That wasn't enough because of my keep lines together, so the whole paragraph got pulled up here, and the subhead came with it. Now the Keep Options dialog box is good for one other thing. I'll show you with this heading over here. I'll select that heading and bring up Keep Options one more time, and this time I'm going to show you Start Paragraph. You have various options in the Start Paragraph pop-up menu. For example, you can say, make sure it starts in the next column, or the next frame, or even the next page. And in this case, I'm going to say, make sure it shows up in the next frame. And you can see that now that whole subhead was pushed up to the top of the frame here. These other 2 settings, next odd page and next even page, those are particularly good for book production. For example, you might want to set next odd page to a chapter title, which will always show up on the odd page, a right-hand page in your document. In general, you'd want to set up all these keep options in your paragraph styles, but that's a topic for another chapter. For now, let's keep looking at other paragraph formatting. So in the next movie, we'll focus on setting lines above or below your paragraphs. Many designs call for a line, or sometimes called a rule, to sit above or below a paragraph, especially a heading. You could spend all day drawing lines with the line tool if you want to, but you'd be a lot better off using InDesign's Paragraph Rules feature. For example, I'll scroll over here, and I'll select this paragraph over here down at the bottom of the page, and I'll zoom in to 2% by pressing Command-2 or Control-2 on Windows. Now I want to put a line below this paragraph, so I've placed the cursor in that paragraph, and now I go to the Control Panel flyout menu and choose Paragraph Rules, or press Command-Option-J or Control-Alt-J on Windows. The Paragraph Rules dialog box gives me a lot of control, and it's broken down into 2 different panels, Rule Below and Rule Above. I'm going to leave it set to Rule Below because I want my line to go below this paragraph. I'll click Rule On, and because the preview checkbox is turned on in the dialog box, we immediately see that a line is placed right underneath that paragraph. It's a little bit clunky, it's not quite the effect I wanted, so let's tweak it a little bit. First, I'll make the line thinner, about half a point. That makes it thinner, but it's still right up against the baseline. I need to move it down. That's what the offset value is for. I'll click in here and then use the arrow keys on my keyboard to move it up to about, let's say, 3 points offset. That moves it exactly 3 points down from the last baseline of the paragraph. We can control the width of the line in 2 ways. First, we can choose either column width or text width. If I set this to text, the line will always go as wide as the text. If I went back and added a word here, the line would get longer. If I removed a word, the line would get shorter. In this case, I'm going to leave this set back to column because I want to show you the left indent. I'm going to change the left indent to a larger value, and you can see that immediately it indents that line. I can do the same thing with the right indent, and here I'm holding the Shift key while using the arrow keys, which moves in higher increments. And I'll just indent that quite a bit there, And with a left indent, that doesn't look quite right. I'll go back to 0. Or in fact, here's something that a lot of people don't know. You can go to negative numbers in the left indent, and that makes the line actually extend past the edge of the text frame. Now, if I didn't want this to be a black line, I could change the text color here and pick any color from my swatches panel, which shows up here. But in this case, I'm going to leave it set to text color, which simply copies the color of the text itself. One last thing, I could change the type. The type could be solid or thin or dashed. Why don't we use dashed, just because that'll look kind of interesting here. So now we have a dashed half-point rule, 3 points down from the baseline, and we got a great-looking rule below there. Now there's a number of other interesting effects you can create using the paragraph rules feature. For example, I'll put the cursor down in this paragraph, go back to paragraph rules, and show you another effect. Lift this up so we can see this. I'll turn on rule on for the rule below, and this time I'm going to make a really thick rule, like 10 points thick. And why don't we change its color to something like a green? Why not? That looks pretty good. But in this case, I'm going to change my offset to move a negative number. That is, it moves the rule below up. And I'll just move that up with my arrow keys until it completely surrounds that text. Then I'll set my left indent back a little bit so the text completely sits inside of there. Now it's a totally different effect. In fact, I could actually then select my text, go to the swatches panel, and set the fill of my text to paper. And now I've got a reversed out text from my rule. And that's pretty cool. It just goes to show sometimes you have to think